Hey, Mark, you're muted.
Thank you. That's about the fifth time I've been told that today. So we'll
Oh,
start over.
just the fifth.
Good day, everyone. Welcome to the CSINext May chapter meeting. We are joined today by Plunkett Raysich Architects, and we're going to talk about 6 steps to successful construction administration. But before we get started, I just wanted to cover some quick chapter business. Again, CSINext is happy to be with Plunkett Raysich today and present this valuable learning session to you. And we would not be here if it was not for the tremendous support from all of our chapter sponsors. Would like to put a huge shout out to Architectural Woodwork Institute, National Gypsum, Northern Facades, KM Architectural Consultants, and Mr. Daniel Hargreaves. Their continued involvement in this chapter and support of it has helped us grow to well over 120 members around the world and be a very integral part of the CSI membership experience. So at the end of this survey, you will receive, or end of this presentation, you will receive a survey. Fill that out if you need to get the AIA credit information. And if you have any questions or problems with that, please feel free to reach out to us at info at CSInext.org. That's the chapter general email address. We will be glad to help you out as much as we can. And with that, I will get everything turned over to the fine folks here at Plunkett Raysich, and we'll get started. Corey?
All right, thank you, Mark. Yes, for everyone online, just have good morning or good afternoon, depending where we're at. We are presenting from Madison, Wisconsin. As Mark said, we're all part of CSI. We are presenting on the 6 steps to successful construction administration. The 4 of us in this room are all certified construction administrators, contract administrators from CSI. So we will go into our introductions shortly. Yeah, and thank you for joining us.
Yep, real quick, Corey, forgot to mention, folks, if you have questions during the presentation, please feel free to type them in down at the Q&A box option on your screen, and we will get to them as soon as we can. Thanks.
Good morning, everyone. As was mentioned, we are Plunkett Raysich Architects, where we do work all over the country. We've done work in 34 states. We really do almost every type of architecture. And as Corey mentioned, the 4 of us here are all construction administration roles within our firm, but are also, as Corey mentioned, avid CSIers and avid followers of construction contract administration. The one thing I wanted to talk about, unlike maybe call it a normal lunch and learn activity where we're a product representative and trying to remain neutral about a product, we are too a product representative. We're representing construction contract administration, but we may not be so neutral. We're certainly going to provide some guidelines and some thoughts about how we find to be successful. The one thing that I wanted to add before we'll turn over to introductions to everyone else is that this is a follow-up to a presentation we did at the national conference about 3 years ago. So one of the things that we just take real good pride in here at PRA is providing thorough construction administration services, and we're going to provide some tidbits on how we do that. With that, just a little bit more about myself. Again, Jason Puestow with PRA. I've been here a long time. I'm a partner here at PRA. I've got all these titles that we'll see here on the screen. And with that, I'll turn it over to Corey to anything else you wanted to add to your introduction.
Yeah, and I should have said when we first did the intros, yes, we did present this at CSI National, and then the following year, actually both with Lane and Mark had asked us about doing a presentation on construction administration just to branch out. So hopefully they saw something in it, so hopefully we can bring that on to you. But yes, Jason just introduced himself. I'm Kurek at PRA. I'm licensed in the state of Wisconsin, and I've been a construction administrator at PRA for just over 8 years.
And I'm Steve Etelamaki. I have been with PRA for 27+ years doing construction administration, 35 years in the industry, and I'm also involved with our in-house quality assurance process and manager of specifications.
Hi, and I'm Russ Owens with PRA. I'm also a licensed architect in Wisconsin, member of CSI, CCCA certified, and I've been with PRA for 18 years and a little over 40 years in the industry. So glad to be with you.
So step one, we're going to start with construction documents. How do construction documents make for a successful construction administration or CA phase?
Second. Sorry.
So working towards construction administration, we're just trying to get our slides to advance here. There, I think we're catching up to it's catching up to us here.
Yes.
Yeah, how exactly do construction documents make for a successful CA phase? It starts with being those, let's go to the CSI 5 Cs. I think it used to be 4 Cs. I think it's grown to 5. It starts with clear, concise, complete, correct, and consistent documents. And so, you know, those documents inclusive of drawings and specifications. You know, we're going to add in a couple others there as well to make good construction documents. Coordinated and constructible. So all part of good construction documents. So, you know, it kind of starts early on with that QA process. And we have a process that you're trying to get to those levels of all of the C's. You got to be clear, you got to be concise. You certainly want the documents to be completed. You want to be correct and very consistent. I'm even going to throw some other C's in there as well for making sure that our documents and your documents are all well for going into the CA phase. Coordinated and code compliant. So working with good construction documents and working with the contractors want to see a good detail that works from the plan to the section to the detail to the blow up detail. And from there, seeing how it's sequenced and understanding how it's sequenced and having those details that work well in the field. And then from the time you see that detail during the CA phase, we see that detail getting installed. And perhaps proactively reviewing that with the contractor or the CM, where you're actually working out the details, say, what do you have coming up on the next site visit or within the next few months? And that could involve pre-install meetings, it could involve mock-ups, all of which we'll get into very shortly. But hopefully what you're seeing there is a good install of what you're observing on the CA phase. So again, just building off of that, you see the detail, the level of detail in the blow up, and you kind of get a good feel for the sequence of operation that the components have to all come together. And that would actually lead to, when you're observing those installations, of, you know, the air and vapor barrier, the membrane flashings, the end dams, the starter sill. And then on the inside, the detail actually showed, I'll go back to it there, spray foam on the inside for any thermal or potential thermal bridging. So observing it from the inside face as well and making sure that all those components are installed accurately. So likewise, moving from the drawings into the specifications, we can kind of build off of that as well, that you see certain things in the specifications that guide you towards, and the contractors towards, a good install. For instance, on a roofing, the picture you see here is actually showing the staggered joints that the specification is calling for, so you don't have any of those thermal bridges that occur when you're roofing, doing layered low slope roofing insulation. So just marrying those components for all leading to a good install. So the takeaway we learned from our first step is good construction documents set good construction expectations.
Okay. Now with step 2, you have to set up your project for successful construction administration. So what does that mean? This is really the who, what, where, when, and why of project setup as a project goes into the construction phase. So the why, we already know, so we can get rid of that because we want to have a successful construction administration. The when, get rid of that as well, because, you know, we are at the CA phase here. You know, these are steps we like to put into place, depending on your project delivery, or some pre-construction, but definitely towards the near of, end of CDs and pre-construction. So we're going to just focus on the other three in this step, the who, what, and where. So who is, when transitioning to the CA phase, is just understanding that your points of contact may change. Here we just have a diagram of your typical OAC relationship, but just to be mindful that as you transition to the CA phase, you know, from the owner group, you know, your points of contact may be changing. You may be bringing a CM on board, which has a whole nother level of players. From the AE side, you know, you have different people sometimes in programming that would take on construction administration. As we pointed out, you know, as a construction administration department, you know, we usually transition to that. So your different point of contacts may change as you're going through. And so it's really just determining who is responsible also then for your reviews of submittals and RFIs during this phase. Directing to some person and also who, you know, who's going to take lead, who will manage the project during construction, and then who just needs to be CC'd and distribution. Another item would be the how. So how are you sharing all of this information? You know, during as you transition to construction administration, you may have different forms of data sharing. We always have our AE form as well as the CM programs of software. Here's just a few examples of some that are out there. I'm sure they all look very familiar to you, but there's a lot out there. And agreeing on a platform early on so you can get everyone on board early. This, you know, helps avoid data scatter. And also make sure everyone has the same access to the same program for any of your tracking, or later on, as much as we don't like to talk about this, for any discovery, you know, we want to be able to own the information and have a readily accessible point. And also just to be mindful that, you know, technology is always changing. We've all heard about that. So these are singular platforms that I am showing here on the screen, but, you know, now we even have hybrids. Hybrids are connectors that will go through the CM software, the architect software, just so everyone owns the same information. So setting that up early on will help eliminate just the emailing back and forth, the multiple phone calls, you know, data scatter. We just want to have a singular point of information sharing. And with that would be, you know, what are you reviewing? You know, establishing the order of submittal reviews. This one's within the design team, but it's obviously coordinated with our construction manager and board. We'd like to see it set up with the project schedule. So we have the prompt and timely reviews for meeting that schedule. And you as the architect, you know, for what are we reviewing? You know, you'll be responsible for reviewing all of the actionable submittals as defined by the project specifications. But for the owner, you know, to establish early on what they want to review. You know, different clients have different desired levels of involvement during the submittal process. You know, we'll have to review everything, but the client probably doesn't want to review your rebar submittal, but door hardware, maybe, you know, in a hospital setting, any specialized equipment, any high-end finishes, you know, they would probably want to review. So setting up early on, understanding who is reviewing what, the how, or the what they're reviewing and who's reviewing. Leads so there's not as much confusion on that. Everyone's making sure their eyes are on the right set of submittals during the submittal process. And our takeaway with that is just identifying and implementing an accurate project workflow is key in establishing team communication. And then we have our step 3 coming up, so we're just doing a quick shuffle here.
Yeah, so the first 2 steps we've kind of talked about are really drawing related and process related, right? What does our drawings look like? How do they hit all the C's that Steve mentioned? And then the process, setting up a process. You know, you don't want to do everything via email. You don't want to do some stuff this way and some stuff that way. But then really this next step is about the first kind of actual item in the field or during the construction process itself. And so step 3, as you'll see titled here, is utilize mockups and pre-installation meetings. So what do we mean by that? So here's a photograph I happened to take. So we're looking at an exterior mock-up of senior living facility here in Wisconsin. And you can see there's 3 different metal panels on it, different types of windows, different types of products, different cast stones, different detailing. And so what we're trying to do is have everybody that was involved in this mock-up there as a stakeholder. So that can be anybody from the contractor that installed the window to the contractor that installed the stone, the sealant contractor, the project managers for those entities, the CM or GC, the field superintendent, their project manager, a quality control consultant. Everybody should be there understanding this, because as we've learned, the major issues that come up on a project are not a result of drawing detailing or maybe a missed detail. Certainly those are factors, but the biggest issue usually is the envelope, and usually has to do with openings in the envelope. And so it's very important here to have everybody involved to be able to talk about and think about how these items get installed. So we're going to utilize those mock-ups. So 2 different types of mock-ups that we like to use. The first is an exterior mock-up. And so this is something that's from one of our drawing sets. And it's fictitious in a sense that we don't have both of these materials ending over a window. You know, it'd either be a brick window or a metal panel window, but we want to see how everything works together. So you're creating something that is representative of all the different materials on the project. And then we're showing that. You know, what details do we want to see? What details from the construction document set are referenced and should be used to develop this mock-up? And so when we do a mock-up, the first step is to look at the substrate. So we're looking at spray applied air and vapor barrier, detailing tape, spray foam insulation, flashings, how far those go into the building, and how everything's going to relate to what comes next. Because once the materials that are the skin of the building go on, you can't see this substrate. So we're always doing this in a step process. So for us, step 1 is to look at the substrate, look at the detailing of that substrate. How does the insulation sit? Is it aligned with the blocking? How do those flashings interface with one another? Do we have spray foam where we want spray foam? Do we have the air and vapor barrier, the detailing tape coming into the building as we've detailed? And how far does that come into the building? Does this initial mock-up comply with our set of drawings? And as you saw from that initial drawing we had, you know, we were referencing like 20 different details for this condition. So then the next step is to put the skin on it or put the materials on it. So you can see, as I mentioned, some of these materials are maybe not necessarily how they would be in the building. For instance, we don't necessarily have brick and metal panel meeting over the top of a window, but we want to see how both of those materials interface with the window. So now again, this is where we want to gain consensus. Everybody's here looking at it. Now we're looking at interfaces, materials, colors, caulking, sealants, brick, everything that goes into it. How does everything look? Is it what is it expected from a detailing standpoint? And maybe more importantly, it's a great time for a mock-up, and we'll talk about this some more. Is this what the client expected? is this the materials that they've envisioning? And we show them renderings when we're in the design process. But is this truly what they were dreaming about, or what they were thinking about, or however you want to describe it? So we're looking at that exterior, and so then we're starting to look at some of the detailing of that. The image on the right, screen right, is two different metal panels meeting each other. What kind of sealant do we want to use? Do we want to use a dark colored sealant that matches the metal panel on the left, or we want to use a light colored sealant that matches the metal panel on the right? All items to be discussed now. And then on the left, you can see how these different materials interface into the window. Are the flashings right? Is the profile of the flashing right? Is the leg of the flashing sticking out the right amount of distance, or is that too far? Creating maybe something that if it was on a school or a senior living facility, something could be damaged. And then we end up finding a location that maybe isn't necessarily as we expected. So this is the end of the metal flashing, and they hadn't accommodated for a third leg on that, a third element on that flashing. I'm gonna move the cursor over here. The area I'm referring to is right here, where this metal flashing terminated and started under the window, and then coming down and being bent as we've called for in detail. But what happens at the end of that? What do we do to close that off? Is it caulk filled? Is it sealant filled? Should that metal flashing be have a light back? These are all items that can be addressed and discussed during that initial exterior mock-up. We just don't do exterior mock-ups sometimes, but we also will do interior mock-ups. So again, in this case, we're using a pre-installation meeting to talk about the requirements of, in this case, polished concrete floor. Those of you that ever specified or detailed or designed a polished concrete floor, they're all different, right? How far are you going to grind into the concrete? What's the sheen? What's the color? How much of the aggregate do you want exposed? So again, here's items where the mock-up and that pre-install conference are very important. We're setting that level of expectation for what the materials are to be. And then also we'll do interior mock-ups. So interior mock-ups don't have to be the finished product. So the right is the plan view of this particular space. The left is the mock-up that was done. So this is an exam room, and you can see the doorway is blue tape, right? And the casework is a combination of real casework, and then you can even see there's like it's almost like a foam core. It was a translucent panel that was used, but how does that all interface? Where does in this case, obviously a patient room, where does the doctor's stool sit? Can he write at that table that's going to be there? And you can see there is even post-its placed about what wanted to be different, right? It's sort of the last chance when you're doing repetitive items such as an exam room or units or whatever it may be to get that right. And the key is to get it right, obviously. So here's another mock-up that we utilized on a project. This is a large senior living facility that was in the state of Maine. And as you can see, it was done during COVID time. So we all got our masks on. I've tried to forget that personally. I don't know about you all on the line, but I've tried to forget those masks. Anyways, so what you see here is a room in the senior living facility. These particular set of rooms had a patient lift. So that patient lift is documented by the blue tape on the floor, the potential path of that lift, and there were constraints. So you can see the constraints in a number of the pictures. On the right, you can see there's an opening that's created above the door to the bathroom that lift has to come through. It also has to come through at a 90-degree angle in order to fit through that properly with the apparatus. And then, okay, we've got that figured out, but then what's next? How does that lift interface with the bed? Is it in the right spot? You can see the client is actually measuring how far that lift is going to be off the bed. Does that allow them to properly pick up the patient from that bed and transport them to either bottom left image, the sitting chair in the room, or the bathroom? And you can see, again, with any mock-up, we're not just doing this between the architect and the owner. It's architect, the owner, the construction manager, subcontractors, subconsultants, trying to gain that consensus. What is the purpose? What is the benefit of doing that? It's to gain that consensus and make sure you're doing it right. And then the last piece that we want to talk about is pre-installation meetings. So that's when we're going over how do the materials interface with one another? Very often suggested, should be done in every project, especially when it comes to that envelope. Like I said, when the issues arise, they're usually with the envelope in our experience. That's what we've seen both in our own firm and what a number of us here at the table have served as expert witnesses on other firms' projects. So in this case, there was a pre-install was done on the computer, and the different colors you see are related to different scopes. So purple, for instance, was the roofing contractor. So what is he responsible for? The other colors were different contractors, and what are they responsible for? Are there any missing elements? Is there anything that needs to be addressed? Are we missing anything in the sequence of construction? And how does this all interface with one another? Where does events go? How do we want this to work? All things that we're discussing virtually in lieu of a mock-up. But again, it's all about trying to discover how the items should be assembled, how they want to work together, and to get the proper detailing and trade responsibility. And maybe lastly, figure out, is anything missing? Did we miss anything? Is a scope missed? Did we as architects miss an item in the detail? And then, so you've done all this, you've done the pre-installs, you've done the interior mock-up, you've done the exterior mock-up. Well, you gotta document that, right? So you'll see some images here from some of the field reports. We'll talk about field reports in a little bit, but we're documenting what occurred. Who was all present? So in the box on the left in the red, you can see, we attended, here's a mock-up, here's who all was all there and why they were there, and what the purpose of that is. And then the corresponding item on the right, screen right, is our notations about what was talked about, what we learned, what we could do, and the like. So again, always think about who should attend and what should occur at these items, and then make sure you have representatives for both the contractors, but more importantly, a product representative, because they can truly vouch for how the installation should occur. So all that being said, takeaway 3. And I think it's very eloquently sums this up in the first sentence. If we're all in agreement beforehand, we shouldn't disagree later. So the key to mocks and pre-installs is to take that proactive approach to creating the project and creating the right details and creating the right construction. So with that, we're going to go to step 4.
Thank you, Jason. Good stuff. Step 4, conduct your site visits at the right time. So what does that mean? It means to try to schedule your site visits at times when the contractor's construction schedule is showing certain milestone events. You should correlate the contractor's construction schedule with the number of site visits contracted to determine how often and when your site visits can be scheduled. It could be weekly, bi-weekly, monthly, or just as requested by the owner. Your site visits are usually allocated in the AIA contract, usually Article 4.2.3 of B101 or B133 of the owner's architect's agreement. So allocated site visits are per your contract as stated. So here's an example of Article 4.2.3 showing the architect shall provide construction services and visit the site 12 times. During also listed in the contract would be the number of inspections to determine when the project is substantially complete in accordance with the contract documents. And also it should be listed as if there should be one inspection or maybe more for the portion of the work that is determined to determine final completion. So you need to try to schedule the site visits on the days when the contractor is holding his OAC meetings or owner architect contractor meetings. So if possible, these site visits could also coincide with the application of important building envelope work, as Jason had brought up and Steve had brought up earlier, or above ceiling inspections or pre-install meetings or mock-up reviews, as Jason just so elaborated on. When a project schedule slips due to delays, the architect should work with the owner and the contractor to set up either a recovery schedule or adjust the site visit timing to accommodate the revised schedule. So in some instances, the architect may even need to add additional site visits to their agreement with the owner. So schedule your site visits at the appropriate time. The picture that you see here was a picture that I had taken on a construction project several years ago. When I was on site, I noticed the foundation wall, which was a lower level, almost a basement type scenario, had a bow in it. So speaking with the contractor on site, it seems like what had happened was that the basement was backfilled before the first floor precast plank was installed, which caused the concrete to bow in. So schedule your site visits to review just the building mock-ups or the foundation insulation, backfilling, major or vapor barrier installations or masonry veneer work, flashings, joint sealants, roof applications, and so forth. So the picture on the left was a good photograph taken of the actual base of wall detail, where it shows the insulation was installed correctly per the contract documents, the termination strip for the through wall flashing, the stainless steel drip edge was installed properly. It all turned out to match the contract documents and the mock-up that had been reviewed. The picture on the right, however, was a picture that was not done properly, and it was a poorly installed masonry detail with a lot of mortar that had filled in the air cavity and plugged up the weeps and so forth. So timing those site visits at the appropriate time to witness this type of stuff is very important. Regular scheduled site visits and OAC meetings. Just addressing special site visit requests out of sequence from contracted site visits requests, such as the installation of a graphic wall design or the installation of specific paint finishes or samples like that, and just be mindful that when accommodating both requests and milestone events with those contracted site visits. But when is the architect to schedule appropriate site visits? Well, we also have engineers and consultants that we use for our projects. So structural engineers, electrical engineers, acoustical engineers, and so forth. You as the architect are responsible for alerting your consultants when to be on site. Similar to you being on site, your contracted amounts of site visits, understand from the beginning that your consultants have their milestones and report and communicate accordingly so that they are on site at the correct time. Ask your engineers when they think they need to be on site. Like the picture on the right is a major electrical underground project or portion of a project. And it was good to have the electrical engineer on site to witness some of this before the concrete was backfilled, or it was backfilled in concrete place. Another time to make sure you're on site is to do in-wall inspections. As shown here, the architect should review wall blocking, perimeter fire stopping, as the picture on the right shows, scheduling the engineers for in-wall rough-in for electrical devices and low voltage devices. Just look for things before they get buried in the walls to make sure they do match and correspond with the contract documents. The architect should also schedule above ceiling reviews with not only our staff, but with the consulting engineers and so forth to look for fire rated stenciling, rated construction, fire stopping, smoke barriers and firewalls and so forth. And the engineers would need to be there prior to any ceilings being dropped to witness all the rough-in work for the MEP contractors. The architect can schedule appropriate site visits also for consultants, such as kitchen consultants, as the picture shows on the left, or theatrical consultants for acousticians or theatrical design consultants and so forth. When to schedule appropriate site visits, maybe for some special interior finishes, and the picture here on the left show some intricate interior finishes that maybe the interior designer you need to have on site to take a look at that before it's all finished. And I was on site last year for a specific project up in northern part of the state, and noticed that the electrical contractor had ran flex conduit on the outside of the substrate or the sheathing for the wall, and trying to figure out why in the world would he run it on the outside when it was a stud framed wall. So going to the inside, we noticed that there are steel columns that you can see there in the picture on the right that were placed there to support the curtain wall framing, and that had not been modeled in the structural or architectural model. So we weren't really aware that those were in the wall cavity, which kind of prevented the electrical contractor from running conduit where he should have. Now, there was no RFI issued or anything like that, so we were able to just catch it on site by just being there at the appropriate time. We worked around it, and the electrical contractor was able to remove the conduit from the outside, and we did some furring on the inside to allow for that work to be completed. So some of the takeaways for number 4 is timing and communications of your contracted site visits allows for successful construction administration. So with that, I'll pass it back on to step 5.
Yeah, so step 5 you'll see is entitled here, make your site visits meaningful. And this is one of the things that I, as an architect, and I, as a leader at our firm, and I would say outside of our firm, really preach. And this is make your site visits meaningful. You know, as an architect, I think sometimes it may be an interior designer, I could lump others in. You're doing this really great project, and you come to the project site, and you know, building looks really good, or the client's really happy, or whatever the case may be. And that's great, don't get me wrong, but really what we're talking about is making that site visit meaningful for you as an architectural firm, for your client, for the CM, and for the long-term wellness of the building. So how do you do that? How do you make your site visits meaningful? Well, as we've talked about, it can be associated with timing, but more importantly, timing matters, but more importantly, what you're looking at matters. And so that's what we really pride ourselves on here at PRA, is making those site visits meaningful. So how do we do that? Well, we're looking at the details. So here's 2 different images of stone masonry. One is a full bed masonry, and one is an adhered masonry. But we're looking at the specifics. Is the control joint where it should be? Is that control joint full depth in the full depth masonry on the left? On the adhered masonry on the right, is there supposed to be mortar exposed between these? Is there still or is that the aesthetic that was desired? At the top of the image on screen right, you'll see 2 pieces of what are cast stone meeting each other. We always detailed that with the mortar being right back and a seal and fill joint being provided there. So we're looking at that joint, it's ready to accept that sealant, and so it's been built the way we want. So we're looking at the details. And that details can be actually with the construction, or it can be with on site. So here's, happens to be Steve, but we've all done this. We're talking about items that either have come up and there's some guidance that's needed by the CM. How are we supposed to do this? Maybe the question that's asked or some derivative of that, or maybe there's an issue that came up and you're trying to work through that. Did you guys really want to detail it this way, or were you supposed to detail it that way? These are the items that we're working on. So we're on site in the trailer, working through specifics. And again, this is electronic, but could be with paper, could be any number of ways. So we're making that site visit meaningful by how we look at the building. We'll talk about that a little bit more too. But then probably the key to this step is doing a report. So AIA G711 is the AIA form that you could use. And if you don't use it, we don't use it, we use the derivative of it, and we'll talk about that in a second. What's important to note here is what items are to be identified. So you can see project, information about the owner, the architect, the contractor. So there's distribution. You'll notice there's a data site visit, the time, the weather, temperature, All that information is really important if you have to go back and recreate something. If a project goes awry or something goes awry. And then it talks about work in progress. Who's present at the site? What are you observing? Is there any follow-up action that is required? So the key to this slide, if you're not using the specific form, is to look at the data and the information that is wanting to be identified. So when we do a report, again, as I mentioned, we do a derivative of that that uses that AIA form as the basis, but then we're going ahead and using, we happen to have a software that we use that's got an app and allows everything to be much easier than in the AIA form, which requires sort of fill-in information. Ours is much more interactive, and I certainly encourage those of you that are doing construction administration to look in softwares like this. But it allows us to make observations, take images, and do all that in an orderly fashion that can be tracked and used when doing a report. So one of the things that's important is like, as it says on the top of the screen, assemble that thorough and relevant site visit report. So in order for your site visit to be meaningful, you've got to have a site visit report that takes into account what was done. So here's an example of something that we do. So you can see the projects identified. You can see what site visit is. It's number 29 of 36. And as Russ mentioned, it's based, our 36 is based on what our owner architect agreement said. Who did the report? You'll see we allow for information about weather, and you can see on this particular visit, Steve happened to be there all day. So it's 8 to 5. So he even talked about different weather events during that day. I mean, so sometimes I'll say sunny when you got on site, but then it rained, or maybe the weather's fine, but the day before there's a downpour, and so the site is muddy. I had a hard time saying Monday. So identifying that all weather, and then general comments. So for us, general comments and what we're recommending and stressing is that talks about what the flow of the day was. I got here at a certain time. When I got there, I maybe attended an OAC meeting, or maybe I walked the site first and then attended an OAC meeting. So you're talking about all these different things. You also should, and we've learned this the hard way for all of you online, make sure you specifically state what you looked at. And if you didn't look at something or didn't get to an area of the building, or maybe you didn't get on the roof because it was raining or snowing, or whatever the reason an area might be, make sure you're identifying that. So very specifically, and again, we call it general comments, but very specifically, develop a kind of initial, for lack of a description, synopsis of what occurred that day. And then now we're getting into the specifics. So we're looking at a specific item. So this happens to be taken from one of our reports, and you can see very specifically, we're saying, okay, we looked at this very specific area, areas C and F on the first floor. This vestibule, reference it by room number on the plan, what it is, its name, all that. And then we're talking about, okay, here's what we looked at. We looked at this, we looked at that. Why did we look at it? And how did we look at it? Is the product right? And is it the right sheathing and all of that? So we're identifying and looking at every item that needs to be in there. And we'll do that for rooms, areas, wings of building, specific items, casework, and the like. So one of the things that I think we've all learned, and I say we, both us at PRA and CSIers in general, is what do you observe? So these are a couple different images. So it's always good to have overall photos. They describe general progress. They show kind of an area that's being completed, but it's an overall photo. And then detailed photos. So now we're looking at the very specifics and taking images of the very specifics that are seen. So the image on the left shows spray plied air and vapor barrier. It's showing the pintles for the brick ties. It's showing the detail flashing coming in. It's showing the framing for that window being put in. And obviously you can see to the right of that, the temporary protection that's still in place because the glass isn't there yet. And then kind of another image of this same area, we're looking, for instance, the way we detail, we call for that spray applied air and vapor barrier to be brought on the horizontal portion of the frost wall and the brick ledge. So we're looking for that. We're looking at the specifics like I mentioned in the mock-up. How far does that detailing tape come into the building? Is that compliant with our drawings and details? You can see there's a box, probably for an exterior outlet. So how is that being done? Is it being, as expected? How is that Romex being run, and where does that come into the wall, and how is that being, detailed to take care of? But we're providing the photographs that show these very specific, detailed close-up items. And so then we're documenting those observations, and really these two words are the key to that. You have a conforming observation and a non-conforming observation. So conforming complies with your spec, complies with your details, complies with your elevation, whatever it may be. And then non-conforming does not conform to that. So there's something that is wrong. And so we always break down our observations into these two categories, if we can call them that. And then we're identifying that in a report. So here's a observation that was made. Here's another observation that was made, and you can see we're looking at materials and progress. And you can see that last sentence of this item: observed hanging east wall, abuse resistant gypsum floor. We've confirmed that that's the correct product specified here. So we're clearly identifying these items. And you can, again, look at the photos. Detailed, product being used, far away, general observation. And then we want to reference those pre-installs, as I mentioned. So, you know, the image on the left is a pre-install and initial install that we did for an exterior window in a wood frame building. And on the right is then later on, visit 16. We're looking at that and we're making observations about, was that done per our requirements? And this one was not. So you can see on status, it says non-conforming. And there was an issue with how that detailing tape or that Tyvek tape was installed against the Tyvek or building rep. And then again, non-conforming items. So here's another image of what we would describe as a non-conforming item. And this happens to be a foundation wall. You're seeing some of it where it gets some masonry and there's a brick ledge, and then below that there's some waterproofing. And in this image, and you can see in the text that's with it, that waterproofing, because of the sequence of construction, had been exposed so long to UV that it was too long. And so you can see it starting to actually sort of fall apart or delaminate and lose its materiality. And so again, you'll see in that last update there, and it needs to be replaced. And it's a non-conforming item. So then we'll want to make sure that that's addressed, and we ask us to be notified in writing when that non-conforming item is complete. So the takeaway from step 5 is proper documentation is paramount to a meaningful site visit, whether it's documenting conforming items or non-conforming items, and how you do all of that. So one last step, we're gonna move the keyboard, bear with us a half a second, and then we'll.
Thank you, Jason. Okay. We're doing good on time. So, all right. Through steps 1 through 5 and step 6, we have to achieve successful substantial completion and construction contract closeout for your client. So, this step is taken for substantial completion, final, and project closeout. So what does that mean? Well, with substantial completion, you know, for better or worse, you know, it is defined as when the space is deemed usable for its intended use, is when it's substantially complete. You know, ideally, we would like it to be further along, but that's also what would transition into our final completion, and then of course tied into our project closeout. So what occurs during substantial completion, and what are the responsibilities? You know, and first off, the predetermined date for substantial completion with your owner and contractor, and you as the architect as well. We want to clarify who needs and wants to attend. You know, who from the owner group wants to be part of the walkthrough. This is something that, you know, maybe you'll have more entities at this time, as well as the construction manager, and then of course, not just the architect, but if we need any special consultants at that time as well. You know, from an AE side, we actually find it helpful to have it more than one person, project size dependent. As I mentioned, this is the time, everyone's wrapping up or turning over the project. You probably will have more people from the owner group. You have multiple people from the construction side, multiple people documenting items. And so we always kind of joke about the parade of people. So what I like to say to have someone else from, your own team, jokingly you would say to, really to distract some of the other member groups, as you have to focus on the items you need to document, and then just having another set of eyes. It's just helpful to just have another set of eyes look over your spaces. Because part of this is you are obligated to go through every room, every space that you have in your drawing set, in your floor spaces. So, okay. And then with that, as you're walking through, you need to develop a method for reporting what needs to be completed or corrected. And Jason talked about the non-conforming or conforming. In this instance, we're really just identifying the items that are non-conforming, because the assumption is that everything else has been corrected to this point. And also in step 2, we went over as an example for the various platforms of document sharing. But this similarly translates to how are we documenting the substantial completion. We showed some of our examples. This is one, so we do really want to go room by room and identify each space. It's important that even though there's multiple parties reviewing the space, that you are still providing your own set of project closeout documentation. And what I mean by that is, I know how many people online have been at a completion and you have a CM says, hey, let's use our platform. You can put this in digitally, we have Procore, it's great, or PlanGrid, and you can drop it in and just use our interface because it's easier to distribute to their subs. Well, that's great for them, but we want them to be able to do their punch list prior to that. But also you are still contractually agreed to present your own form of documentation. So, one, walking through and adding stuff to somebody else's form of documentation, doesn't show that it's truly yours and that you're fulfilling that agreement. But also, how many times if you walk through and you say, put this down, and it may or may not get onto that particular form. So it's really hard to then come back later on and close out and say, well, I told them to put it in this report, but it's not there. So this is you doing your quality assurance as well. You can always reference the other entities, reference the owner has another punch list, or the CM has a different punch list, or refer to design build, MEP contractors, if you will. But we still, from our end, will always still present a form, some sort of report that says when we were there and to fill up our documentation. So this is just an example of one. As you can see, it's room by room, identifying every room. We also kind of joke going room, it's, north, south, east, west, look at the ceiling, look at the floor, look at the door, so, how you want to say that is really up to you. But this is an example. It's still, this is an example of one that we would do our typical report, which is, again, room by room, list the items that are non-conforming. And this is really a supplement to everything that, everyone else as part of the walkthrough has also looked at. We typically do not use photos in our reports. Photos, one, it leads to larger documentation, but also that way you don't have people coming back and saying, well, you didn't show this image, or, this paint touch up or this wall ding wasn't on there. And so we try to make them a little bit more general in that sense. So again, this is an example of a substantial completion report, just listed room by room or itemized, but, not to go straight, here is also an example of one with photos, because there are certain instances where it does make sense to maybe supplement a photo to just help, show the deficiencies. If it makes sense to the particular item or particular bit that you're reviewing. Wouldn't want to do this maybe for a very large project, but if you're doing something more smaller, more specific, you know, in that instance, photos very well may help. So, just for quick sake of variety, I know we've shoved a lot of information your way, but we always like to just show a couple, funnies. So as I said, substantial completion, you know, ideally complete, but not always quite there. So we just have some items that would call out, you know, here's a example. These are, you know, blackout shades, you know, but didn't quite work in this instance here. Did a really good job of, you know, forming the site concrete here, but you know, we probably want that fixed as well. Just a little chamfered edge, just, you know, things you see. This is our famous square peg round hole. Little bit of landscaping lighting, maybe, you know, not quite where we want it for site lighting. And just a personal favorite, things you see, can't always believe it,
Whoa.
but you know, it looks like a minion here. And then again, so sorry, real quick is final completion. You know, we at Pure, you know, we like to use a project checklist to just kind of guide you through to make sure your I's are dotted, T's are crossed after the substantial completion. So it's a good good form to have just to make sure you are completing everything. Example of that. And excuse me. And then lastly, just be prepared based on your relevant project forms, you know, whether you're doing it with the city or state, you know, DHS, city, state, and then of course, ending with your certificate of substantial completion to just make sure you have that at the ready for your client and for the contractor based on who's inspecting at that time. And with that, it's because, well, it's our finish strong and your client will thank you. Happy projects, happy people. Which is our takeaway for step 6. And sorry, Mark, I know you jumped on. We were, you know, timing through this.
Yeah,
Hopefully
yeah, and
we-
I think, yeah, we're we're
minutes.
coming close to the, very close to the end here, but this has been very informative, and I was able to attend the first portion in Denver a couple of years ago, and that was very good as well. I do have, I know we're running up against time here. I do have a few questions that came across. What I'll do is I'll email you guys a list of the other questions I've got.
Okay.
And then I can distribute out your answers to everybody that attended. But a couple key ones that I thought were really good that came across. On the mock-ups, I know you can't really tell a contractor what he has to put in his schedule, activity-wise. Have you seen, or have you been able to recommend the contractors that they actually put the mock-up activity in their schedule? So they could, you know, because as they're doing this in the field, I can see, you know, if a mock-up, I've been through a couple mock-ups with a client where they've had to be redone, you know, multiple times. And if you're not approving the mock-up, that means the materials, hopefully they're not getting changed and or they're not there yet, but that could definitely impact. I mean, that's going to steamroll critical path down the line. Have you seen contractors actually put that activity or time frame into their schedule? And if not, would you recommend that maybe that happen? Depending on what the mock-up is. I mean, if you're mocking up a door frame, that's one thing, but if you're mocking up an exterior wall like you folks were showing, that's a whole, that involves a whole lot of people.
Yeah, so obviously from our standpoint, we put it in the specifications, we put it in the drawing, so the requirement is known, for lack of a description, from day one. That being said, very rarely do we get them put into the schedule. We do somewhat, but you know, the goal would, like you said, you know, do you need to do that because in order to order material, you got 12 weeks. So that becomes really more a part of what we found is to just discuss that. You know, you're having your initial meetings on site. When are we doing the mock-up, guys or gals or company or however you want to
Pre-construction
describe it,
meeting.
right? So it becomes a topic of conversation. So at least it's out in front. But yeah, as you said, we can't really dictate schedule.
Right. next one I had that came across was with all the technology we got out there, we got BIM 360, we got Procore, we've got the new Forma and the Connect and all that stuff you guys were showing. From a construction administration standpoint, depending on the delivery method, I personally do a lot of design build work and a lot of IPD work. What has been your experience with having owners or representatives access that technology, and how deep have they been allowed to access it? Because I know there's a lot of things that you probably wouldn't mind your client seeing, but you don't want them in the weeds of everything.
Yeah, and that's a great question relative, and we touched on it a little, is that, you have those initial meetings, right? And you say, okay, where do you want to go and how deep and what kind of permission do you want to give them with these softwares, right? Some educated owners, reps want to see like literally everything, right? And then you have some owners that, this isn't their day job, as I like to say, right?
Right.
They build a building because they have to, right? They need to move or whatever the case may be. And it's all about those expectations and setting those up front so then you can figure it out. But yeah, we've had owners that frankly don't care at all, other than maybe a color. And then we've got owners who are like, yeah, I want to see every submittal.
They
And
want
it's
to see
just
every
like,
nut and bolt.
right?
Yeah.
That's also one we generally like to see, they generally like to have access to, but when I said for like the twos, like, distribute to some person versus CC'd, obviously they can still look in and have full access, but, to not get them in the weeds, we try not to always like copy them on all the things that we would think are like weed-esque, if you will, and
Yes.
just copy them on the items that, they really want to see, so they're notified to look in. I mean, of course, everyone can do their digging and set their filters to look at everything, but
Right.
we don't want to draw attention to everything that goes behind the scenes
Exactly.
either,
Kind
right?
of
So
kind of a
it's
project
something
dependent
you still
and
kind of,
lessons
work through.
learned application of, oh, we don't want to do that again. So, and I think the last one, when we were touching on the observation reports and such, like I said, I've got several others here that came across that I'll email out to you guys. What are some verbiages, words, statements, things that as construction administrators, when we're reporting on what we see or what is transpiring in the field, what are some good, because I know when we put together specs, we got to be careful what we say and how we say it. What are some good things to use verbiage wise to make sure that you don't overstep into means and methods on the contractor and not exposing yourselves to additional risk?
Right, great question. I mean, we probably could go on for a half an hour about this.
Half an
one.
hour.
I know
Yeah,
Stephen and I
next
both had-
presentation topic.
But one of the words that I like, there's a whole series of buzzwords that I like is, the ones I like to use is appear, right? It appears from my visual observation that that's correct, but I'm not doing an exhaustive inspection.
Yes, and the most operative word I think used is observed.
Right.
And I think
Observe and observe.
CSI does a very good job of making sure that, we only do 2 inspections, one to establish substantial completion, one to establish final completion, but when we're out there before that, we're observing.
Yes.
And just real quick tie to that is, we try not to say like the I or the we, or I should say, we always use the royal we, to make it more ambiguous of like who's all there, but also if items were discussed, when you're observing something, to make sure that, this was discussed, and then we, identify the identities that were part of that discussion. So not calling them out specifically by name, but by
Right.
entity. So that the contractor was there, that the owner, and just identifying it that way. So it doesn't like necessarily pinpoint it, and make sure it's like a, global observation across all parties. So that way it kind of disseminates any stuff. And then to say we're in agreement, or, the other thing is if we're not in agreement, but it's documented as an observation, as we'll say, we'll follow up later or something. So it's not necessarily put in the report if we don't feel confident about putting it in the report at that given time.
Right. So there's actually kind of do a little QA on the report before it goes out the door, just to make sure that everything's in line and nobody's stepping in someplace where they shouldn't be.
Right.
Okay. All right, well, we are a few minutes over. Like I said, guys, I will send you this list of questions here within the next day or so, and I'll get them out to everybody. I would like to thank all of you for your time. PRA, excellent job, great topic. Everyone on the line, thank you for attending. And to all of our CSI members that are upcoming, hopefully successful certificates here on the exam window coming up, I think ending sometime in June here for the CDT, CCCA, CCS, and CCPR. Good luck on your tests. We hope you're successful. And CSINext June meeting will be on Wednesday, June 19th. We will be joined by our friends north of the border from Canada with the Canadian Construction Documents Committee. Looking forward to that presentation. So keep an eye out at csiresources.org and csinext.org for information on that. Corey and folks, thank you very much. And look forward to seeing you guys in Houston.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Enjoy your day.